The old house at 77 Birchwood Place has a language all its own, one I learned over a lifetime. I know the contented groan of the floorboards in the upstairs hall when the afternoon sun hits them just right, and the gentle sigh the plumbing makes in the dead of winter. It's a language of comfort, a dialect of home spoken in creaks and whispers. My husband Thomas and I, we weren't just the first owners, we were its co-authors. I can still picture Tom, his face smudged with dirt but beaming with pride, as he planted the 2 birch trees out front that gave the street its name. "For you, Ev," he'd said, "so you always have a little bit of the forest you love right outside your window. This house is a library of our life together. Every room is a chapter." The faint, almost imaginary scent of Tom's pipe tobacco that still clings to the curtains in his study is a paragraph about quiet evenings spent reading side by side. The sunny yellow of the nursery walls is a sentence about our boundless hope before our son, Christopher, was born. Even the almost invisible scratch on the hardwood floor by the fireplace is a footnote about a 3-year-old Chris learning to ride a bright red tricycle and taking a corner with a little too much enthusiasm. When Tom passed 5 years ago, the house fell silent. Its language became one of shared grief, and the quiet was a heavy, suffocating blanket. That's why, when Christopher lost his job and asked if he and his wife Jessica could move in, a part of me felt a flicker of relief. "It's just for a little while, Mom," he'd promised, his face etched with a sincere, worried frown. 6 months, a year at the most, just until we can get our feet back under us. His words were a key turning in a long-locked door, letting life and sound back in. A little while has since stretched into 2 long years. Initially, their presence was a melody played against the house's quiet hum, the sound of their footsteps on the stairs, the low murmur of a talk show from the living room, the scent of Jessica's floral shampoo drifting from the bathroom. It was all evidence of life. I embraced my role as matriarch, happy to help, to feel needed again. I cooked the meals Tom and I had always loved, I kept the house tidy, and I contributed my entire pension check to the household fund without a moment's hesitation. That's what a family does. You circle the wagons, you take care of your own. I'd sit in my favorite armchair, the one with the worn damask pattern that Tom swore was the exact color of my eyes, and I'd watch them. I saw a family weathering a storm together, safe under the sturdy roof Tom and I had built. I was so comforted by the familiar rhythms of a full house that I failed to notice the subtle, discordant notes of resentment beginning to creep into the melody. I was listening for the sounds of love and didn't recognize the creeping static of contempt. The shift was insidious, a slow poisoning of the atmosphere that began, as so many family tragedies do, at the dinner table. It wasn't a loud argument, but a series of quiet, paper-cut remarks that slowly bled my confidence dry. I'd always taken immense pride in my cooking. It was my love language. One Tuesday evening, I decided to make Tom's absolute favorite. A slow-braised pot roast, rich with onions and carrots, simmered for hours until the meat was succulent and the gravy was a deep, savory brown. It was a meal that smelled like celebration, like love. I served it with pride, watching as Chris and Jessica filled their plates. But Jessica just pushed the tender meat around with her fork, a small, tight frown on her face. "This is very rich, Evelyn," she said, her voice laced with a sweetness so artificial it was cloying. "Chris and I were just reading an article about saturated fats. And beef, my goodness. The price of it these days is just astronomical. I saw the grocery receipt on the counter. It's quite a splurge." I looked to my son, expecting him to leap to my defense to say, "It's delicious, Mom," or "Don't worry about it." Instead, he just nodded slowly, avoiding my gaze. "Jess has a point, Mom. We've really got to be more careful. Maybe we should focus on leaner proteins. Chicken breasts, maybe, and probably smaller portions all around. Every little bit helps." A small, cold stone of dread formed in my gut. This wasn't about health, and it certainly wasn't about money. My pension more than covered the groceries I personally selected and paid for. This was about control. It was a subtle, condescending lesson in my own supposed profligacy. The following week, the suggestions became directives. Jessica approached me while I was putting away groceries, holding a clipboard, and wearing a determinedly cheerful expression that didn't reach her eyes. "Evelyn, "I had a great idea to help us all stay on track," she announced, her tone that of a camp counselor addressing a problematic child. "I've made up a weekly meal plan and a food budget. It'll make things so much easier." She showed me the list. It was a catalog of austerity, store-brand everything, a strict ban on what she called frivolous snacks, like the dark chocolate almonds I adored, and a rule about no seconds at dinner. The word "we" was used liberally, but the rules were clearly aimed at me. My kitchen, once my domain of creativity and care, now felt like a commissary. The pantry, once a symbol of abundance and my ability to provide, became forbidden territory. I'd find myself hesitating before opening the refrigerator for a glass of juice, conscious of their eyes on me. I started to feel like a trespasser in my own home, every apple I ate a petty crime against their grand financial plan. The family table, once a place of warmth and communion, had transformed into a sterile boardroom where I was the underperforming asset being managed into obsolescence. The night the final line was crossed, I woke around 2 a.m., a familiar restlessness pulling me from a shallow, uneasy sleep. The house was shrouded in a profound, deep silence. My immediate thought was of a glass of cold milk, a simple, lifelong comfort, a remedy for insomnia that Tom and I had often shared, whispering in the dark kitchen like teenagers. I slipped from my bed, my bare feet finding their familiar path on the cool, smooth wood of the hallway floor. The house was a sleeping beast, its breath held in the stillness of the night. As I entered the kitchen, a single sharp sliver of moonlight from the window over the sink sliced across the room, illuminating something that was profoundly, jarringly wrong. It was an unnatural glint of silver, a flash of cold metal on the front of my cream-colored refrigerator. My mind, still clouded with sleep, refused to process it for a long second. I stepped closer, my hand reaching out instinctively for the handle. My fingers didn't touch the smooth, familiar enamel. They brushed against the cold, hard steel of a foreign object. It was a heavy-duty hasp, the kind one might use to secure a garden shed or a high school locker, with a small brass padlock hanging from it like a single malevolent teardrop. I stood there, frozen, just staring. The sight was so utterly bizarre, so brutally out of place in the heart of my home, that my brain couldn't form a coherent thought. A wave of cold, sharp disbelief washed over me, so powerful it felt like a physical shove. My heart began a frantic, panicked drumming against my ribs. This must be a mistake, a sick, cruel joke. With a hand that trembled uncontrollably, I turned and padded silently across the linoleum to the pantry door. My breath hitched in my throat, a dry, rasping sound in the quiet room. There was another one, identical to the first, its padlock a single, winking eye in the oppressive darkness. They had locked the food away from me. The silence of the house was no longer peaceful. It was accusatory, suffocating. A deep, chilling humiliation began to creep into my veins, a slow-moving poison. I was 78 years old, standing in the kitchen of the home I had owned for over 4 decades, and I was being treated like a gluttonous animal, a thief to be thwarted in the night. I didn't rattle the doors. I didn't make a sound. I simply stood there in the pale moonlight, a prisoner in my own sanctuary. The chill from the floor seemed to seep right into the marrow of my bones, a deep, invasive cold that had nothing to do with the air temperature. I retreated slowly, backing out of the kitchen as if I had stumbled upon a grotesque crime scene. And in a way, I had. The monster wasn't a stranger. It was the chilling, undeniable cruelty of my own child. That night, sleep was an impossible dream. I sat in my damask armchair, staring into the blackness of my room. The image of those 2 shiny new locks burned forever onto the back of my eyelids. The following morning, I orchestrated my movements with the precision of a stage play. I remained in my room, a silent audience to the morning's grim performance. I listened as I heard Christopher and Jessica move about the kitchen. I heard the distinct metallic clink of a small key, the sharp click of a padlock being opened, the familiar hum of the refrigerator door. The sounds were no longer domestic, they were clinical. The sounds of a warden distributing rations. They ate their breakfast in hushed tones, and then I heard the lock snap shut again. The cold fury that had been simmering inside me all night finally boiled over, providing me with a rigid backbone of resolve. I walked with purpose into the living room, where Christopher sat on the sofa, scrolling through his phone, the picture of nonchalance. Jessica was at the counter, wiping it down with a vigor that seemed designed to project an air of wholesome domesticity. "Christopher," I said. My voice was a low, steady thing, betraying none of the earthquake of emotions inside me. He glanced up, his expression one of faint irritation at having his morning routine interrupted. "What is the meaning of the locks?" I asked, my gaze fixed on him, refusing to let him look away. He had the grace to look momentarily ashamed, his eyes flicking toward Jessica for support. She turned, her hands paused on the dish towel, her face arranged into a mask of patronizing concern. "Mom, we knew this would be upsetting, but we need to have a serious talk about it," Chris began, setting his phone down as if preparing for a difficult negotiation. "Things have just been spiraling. We had to take action." "Take action?" I repeated, my voice rising despite my efforts to control it. "You have put padlocks on the refrigerator and the pantry. In my home." Jessica stepped forward, taking on the role of the calm, rational adult. "Evelyn, please, let's not be melodramatic. It isn't a punishment. Think of it as a structural budgeting tool. We're all having to make sacrifices to get ahead." "A budgeting tool?" I let out a short, sharp laugh, devoid of any humor. "I am not a leaky faucet you can just fix, Jessica. I am your husband's mother." That's when Christopher's fleeting shame curdled into defensive anger. He stood up, his height making him seem even more imposing. "Listen, Mom," he said, his voice taking on a hard, resentful edge. "You're eating us out of house and home. It's the constant snacking, the half-eaten things you leave in the fridge, the expensive items. We are drowning in debt, trying to save for our own future, and frankly, your habits are setting us back. This is the only way to get your spending, our spending, under control. Eating you out of house and home?" The phrase struck me with the force of a physical blow. I looked at my son, at the face I had once kissed and wiped clean of tears, and I saw a stranger, a cold, callous accountant who viewed his own mother as a financial liability. "My pension," I said, my voice shaking with rage and a hurt so profound it was dizzying. "My pension pays for every single grocery item I bring into this house. You know that." Jessica let out an exaggerated, world-weary sigh. "Evelyn, of course your pension helps, but it doesn't cover everything. Do you have any idea what the property taxes are on this place? The utilities? The homeowner's insurance? This house is incredibly expensive to run. It was the final devastating nail in the coffin of our relationship. This house. Not our house, not even my house. It was an object, an asset, and a burden that I, apparently, was not doing enough to maintain. In their minds, they were the beleaguered homeowners, and I was the tenant who was falling behind on her rent." I didn't say another word. I turned on my heel and walked back to my room, their twisted, cruel logic echoing in my ears, the truth of their feelings laid bare and ugly. I closed my bedroom door, and the soft click of the latch felt like the closing of a vault on a life I once knew. My room, my sanctuary, suddenly felt like a cage. I collapsed into my damask armchair, the fabric cool against my skin, and the dam of my composure finally broke. The tears that came weren't just for the humiliation of the padlocks. I was mourning the son I had lost, the kind, loving boy who had been replaced by a bitter, resentful man. I was grieving for the illusion of family that had just been shattered into 1,000 pieces. As I sat there, wrapped in a shroud of my own misery, my gaze drifted to the old mahogany secretary desk in the corner. It was a beautiful, solid piece that Tom and I had haggled for at an antique fair in a small Vermont town on a crisp autumn Saturday decades ago. It was our command center, the place where the blueprints of our life together, mortgage papers, insurance policies, our wills, were neatly filed away. Drowning in despair, a specific memory suddenly broke through the fog, as sharp and clear as a lighthouse beam in a storm. I was suddenly 20 years younger, sitting in the stuffy, wood-paneled office of our lawyer, a kind man named Mr. Donovan. Tom was beside me, his hand a warm, reassuring weight on mine. We were signing the last of the paperwork, paying off the final mortgage payment on 77 Birchwood Place. I remembered the immense relief, the feeling of unburdening. Mr. Donovan, smiling, had slid the official deed across the polished mahogany desk toward us. Tom picked it up, his grin wide and triumphant. He turned to me, his eyes shining with pride and love, and said, his voice thick with emotion, "Here you go, Ev. It's all ours. But most importantly, it's all yours. No one can ever take this away from you. This house is your fortress." Your fortress. The words, once a sweet sentiment, now echoed in my mind as a powerful direct command from the past. A jolt of adrenaline, cold and pure, shot through me, instantly evaporating my tears. I pushed myself out of the chair, my movements no longer frail and defeated, but imbued with a new, steely purpose. I walked to the secretary, my fingers, which had been trembling with hurt, now as steady as a surgeon's. I found the small, ornate key and unlocked the roll top. The familiar scent of old paper and cedar filled the air. I bypassed the folders of sentiment, old report cards, letters, photos, and went straight for the ones marked household. I sifted through insurance documents, old tax returns, Tom's will, until my fingers closed around a thick manila folder labeled Deed of Trust. With a deep breath, I pulled out the heavy, cream-colored document. My eyes scanned the page, past the legal jargon to the operative line. And there it was, printed in crisp, indelible ink, a fact as solid and unchangeable as the foundation of the house itself. The sole owner of the property located at 77 Birchwood Place was listed as Evelyn Hayes. Not Christopher Hayes. Not Jessica Hayes. Not a family trust. Just me. In the chaos of grief and the gentle, numbing routine of the last few years, I had forgotten. The ultimate power I held. Jessica's condescending words replayed in my head. This house is incredibly expensive to run. They thought it was their burden. They had made a fatal error. They had forgotten who signed the checks. A profound, icy calm settled over me, displacing the hot rage and chilling hurt. They had underestimated me completely. They saw a dependent, a relic, a doddering old woman to be managed and controlled. They had forgotten that I was the queen in this castle, and it was long past time I reminded them of that fact. The next morning, I did not engage. I let them perform their morning ritual with the keys and the locks, a silent observer from my room. Strategy, I realized, required patience. As soon as I heard the front door close behind them, signaling their departure for their respective part-time jobs, my own operation began. I didn't reach for my phone to call a family therapist or a mediator. I walked to the bookshelf and pulled out the thick, heavy yellow pages, a relic from another time that now felt like an ancient book of spells. First, however, I made a more important call. My dear friend Shirley, my sharp-witted partner from our weekly bridge club, had been a top-tier paralegal for a formidable Boston law firm for 40 years before she retired. Shirley understood the architecture of the law, not just the theory. "Shirley, it's Evelyn," I said when she answered with her usual brisk hello. "I have a legal question for you, purely hypothetical, of course." I laid out the situation, sanitizing the most humiliating details, but making the core conflict brutally clear. My son and his wife, living as my guests, had begun to physically lock me out of my own pantry and refrigerator. Shirley was silent on the other end of the line for a long moment. I could almost hear the gears of her formidable mind turning, processing, and then clicking into a place of cold, hard logic. "Evelyn," she finally said, her voice dropping the pretense of a casual chat and taking on the firm, clear tone that had once made young attorneys quake in their boots. "Tell me one thing. Is your name the only one on that deed? No co-ownership? No life estate for Christopher? Nothing funny?" "Just my name," I confirmed, my voice steady. "The house was paid in full long before Tom passed." "Then it's as simple and clean as a freshly cut diamond," Shirley declared. "It is your sole and separate property. Legally speaking, they are tenants at will, which is just a fancy way of saying they are guests with no lease and no rights. You have the absolute, unequivocal right to revoke their privilege of residing there. You can ask them to leave, and if they refuse, you can start a formal, legal eviction. And you most certainly, 100%, have the right to change the locks, on every single door of your own house." Her words were not just advice. They were a benediction. They were the legal and moral reinforcement I needed, washing away any lingering doubt or guilt. This wasn't an emotional overreaction. It was the righteous defense of my property and my dignity. "Thank you, Shirley," I said, my voice thick with a gratitude so immense it was almost painful. That was precisely what I needed to hear. After we hung up, I felt a fire ignite in my chest. I turned back to the yellow pages, its thin paper crinkling under my determined fingers as I flipped to the L section. I ignored the flashy, full-page ads and found a simple professional listing: Liberty Lock and Safe, 24-hour service. I dialed the number. A polite, no-nonsense voice answered. "Liberty Lock, how can I direct your call?" "I would like to schedule a service for this afternoon," I said, my voice as calm and solid as the mahogany desk in front of me. "I need to have all of the exterior locks on my house replaced." There was a brief professional pause. "All of them, ma'am? Front, back, and garage?" "Yes," I confirmed, a hint of steel in my voice. "High-security deadbolts on all of them. Everything." We scheduled the appointment for 1 p.m. As I placed the receiver back in its cradle, I glanced toward the kitchen. The padlock on the refrigerator was a monument to their disrespect. My response, I vowed, would be a fortress. They drew a line with a cheap brass lock. I was about to redraw it with forged steel. At 1 o'clock on the dot, a discreet white van with "Liberty Lock and Safe" written in simple blue letters pulled into my driveway. A polite, clean-cut man in a navy blue uniform, carrying a heavy metal toolbox, rang the doorbell. "Mrs. Hayes?" he asked. "You called about a full lock replacement?" "That's me," I said, swinging the door open wide, a gesture that felt both welcoming and deeply symbolic. "Please, come in." For the next hour and a half, the quiet, tense house was filled with the symphony of my emancipation. The sharp, decisive whir of a power drill, the grating scrape of old metal being pried from wood, the satisfying, solid thunk as old lock sets were removed and discarded. I sat in my armchair and watched him work, a silent, resolute supervisor of my own quiet coup d'etat. He began with the front door. As he expertly dismantled the old, familiar brass knob and deadbolt, the very set Tom and I had chosen together at a hardware store on a long-ago Saturday, I felt a fleeting pang of nostalgia. It was a piece of our shared history, but that pang was immediately extinguished by a wave of righteous purpose. This was not an act of erasing the past, but of fiercely protecting my present and securing my future. As he fitted the new heavy-duty hardware, its brushed nickel finish gleaming with a cold, beautiful light, I felt my posture straighten, my shoulders pull back. He moved methodically to the back door, and then to the one leading into the garage. With each lock he replaced, I felt a tangible layer of the shame and helplessness that had been suffocating me simply fall away, clattering to the floor with the old metal. When he was finished, he presented me with a small, sealed plastic bag. Inside were 3 brand-new keys. They felt heavier than the old ones, solid and powerful in my palm. "All set, Mrs. Hayes," he said, handing me the invoice. I wrote him a check, adding a tip so generous it made him blink. "Thank you," I said. "You've done an excellent job." After his van disappeared down the street, I walked through my reclaimed territory, testing each door. The new keys slid in with a silken smoothness. The deadbolts turned with a solid, definitive click. It was the most beautiful, most empowering sound I had ever heard. I made myself a pot of strong tea and sat in the living room to wait. At 5:30 p.m., as predictable as the setting sun, I saw Christopher's sensible sedan pull into the driveway. I watched from behind the curtain as he and Jessica got out, their conversation muted by the glass, their body language casual as they walked up the front path. I saw Chris dig his keyring from his pocket. He selected a key and inserted it into the new lock. It refused to go in. He frowned, jiggling it in frustration. He pulled it out, examined it as if the key itself were faulty, and tried again. Nothing. Jessica watched him, a confused look slowly dawning on her face. "What's the matter?" I heard her muffled voice through the thick wood of the door. "Key's stuck. It won't work," he grunted, his annoyance growing. He began to rattle the doorknob with increasing force, then knocked. 3 hard, impatient raps. I rose from my chair and walked calmly to the door. I did not open it. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood for a second, took a breath, and spoke. My voice was clear, strong, and carried easily through the door. "Can I help you?" A stunned silence fell on the other side. "Mom?" It was Christopher, his voice a cocktail of disbelief and confusion. "What the hell is this? Open the door." "I'm afraid I can't do that, Christopher," I said calmly. "There's been a significant change to the structural budgeting tools around here. You were so concerned I was eating you out of house and home. I decided to simplify the equation for you." "What are you talking about?" he yelled, his voice cracking with panic and rising anger. "I'm talking about the deed to this property, Christopher. The legal document. The one that is in my name, and my name alone. You seem to have forgotten that you are guests in my house, and your visit is now officially over." I heard Jessica let out a sharp, strangled gasp. Christopher began to pound on the door with his fist. "Mom, stop this nonsense. This is insane. Let us in right now." "No," I said, my voice as unyielding as the new deadbolt between us. "This is my fortress, and you are no longer welcome inside its walls." The pounding on the door was a frantic, desperate percussion, the rhythm of a man whose entire world had just been upended by a reality he had long chosen to ignore. It was followed by a barrage of shouting from Christopher, a torrent of disbelief, accusations of senility, and hollow threats. Jessica's voice was a high-pitched, pleading whine in the background. "Evelyn, please, we can talk about this. Just open the door! Don't do this to us!" I remained where I was, my back pressed firmly against the solid oak of the door, a silent and immovable sentinel in my own home. I did not engage. I did not argue. There was simply nothing left to say. Their words were just noise now, the meaningless static of a station I had finally turned off. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 10 minutes, the noise subsided. It was replaced by the sound of frustrated, shuffling footsteps on the porch, the slam of car doors, and the angry squeal of tires as Christopher's car sped away, leaving a cloud of dust and indignation in its wake. The silence that descended in its absence was absolute. It wasn't the lonely, heavy silence of grief, nor the tense, suffocating silence of the past few months. It was a clean, pure, and profound silence. It was the sound of sovereignty. I turned from the door and walked into my kitchen. The evening light was slanting through the window, illuminating a room that was now entirely mine. My gaze fell upon the refrigerator. The ugly metal hasp and its brass padlock were still affixed to the door, a final, vulgar scar from the reign of petty tyranny. I went to Tom's old tool drawer in the utility room, the one that smelled of oil and sawdust, and retrieved a sturdy Phillips head screwdriver. With a series of satisfying, forceful turns of my wrist, I pried the offending hardware from the enameled surface. It came away with a final, ugly screech, leaving 4 small, raw holes behind. They were scars, yes, but they were the scars of a battle I had decisively won. I threw the lock and hasp into the trash can with a clang. Then I opened the refrigerator. The small light flickered on, a beacon in the dusk, revealing shelves of food that were now, unequivocally, mine to enjoy, without judgment or justification. I took out the milk, a carton of eggs, some sharp cheddar cheese, and a tomato. I made myself a perfect fluffy omelet and 2 slices of buttered toast. It was the first meal in months that I ate with genuine pleasure, with no shadow of shame or guilt to sour its taste. The next day, I had Shirley help me draft a formal, legally sound letter. It stated, in no uncertain terms, that Christopher and Jessica could schedule a 2-hour window on the upcoming Saturday to retrieve their personal belongings, and that I, or a designated representative, would be present to supervise. The phone calls came, of course. Some were angry, some were tearful, some were pathetically manipulative. I remained steadfast. They arrived on Saturday in a rented U-Haul truck. I sat in my living room and watched in detached silence as they packed their lives into cardboard boxes. Christopher refused to meet my eye. Jessica just sniffled into a tissue. That evening, long after they were gone for good, I sat in my damask armchair, a cup of chamomile tea warming my hands. The house hummed around me, its old familiar language of comfort and peace fully restored. It was a brutal lesson to have to teach my own son, a heartbreaking truth to be forced to act upon. But as I looked around at the warm, lamplit rooms of the home Tom and I had built at my fortress, I knew with unshakable certainty that I had done more than just change the locks on my doors. I had reclaimed my life. I had restored my dignity. I had remembered who I was. And some things are worth any battle, even one fought in your own kitchen.